All right, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, here we go again. I'm gonna have to come up with something to introduce these deals with. It's a kind of a rainy, drizzly day, and I've got some little honeydew things around the place here to do that I normally and have been not doing because I would rather ride, but since it's kind of a rainy, drizzly day, that gives me the chance to do that. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that are on my mind. And it's kind of a sniffly day too, so poor Amy, she can't stand to let these things go on air without editing my sniffles out, so she's going to have to sit down and listen to my yammering. But what's on my mind is I'll kind of give you a little backstory, and forgive the sound of the gates opening and shutting, the chains rattling. But I'll give you the little backstory here. At the last clinic I did, there was a guy there that had a 10-year-old gray mare, and she is broke. And I mean, he ranches on her, he fox hunts on her, he show jumps on her, his wife show jumps, I think, on her. Just whatever you want to do, she can do it. And really nice mare. But she's still in a snaffle bit. And we talked about that a little bit, about why she's in a snaffle bit. And he was of the understanding, like a lot of people are, that you don't advance out of that snaffle until everything's perfect. And you know, to me, that's a myth. I understand why a lot of people coach that, because it's an effort to keep people from getting super excited about going into the bridle and then going into the bridle too soon. And so they preach that everything's got to be perfect before you move on, but it's just not true, and it's not possible. Hey, go on down there, you mares. I'm kicking some mares out in the arena, and I'm going to kick a stud with them, but they don't want to leave where that stud's at, which tells me that it's time. Now I'm going to kick the stud out. Anyway, so I understand the reasoning behind that, but it's simply not true, because first of all, you're never going to get everything perfect. One. And then two, not every horse has the mentality, the conformation, etc., to learn everything in the bridle or in the snaffle. You know, snaffle's a good tool for what it's good for, but there's a real low level of communication in a snaffle bit. And so a lot of horses can actually go get him, big boy. No, go ahead. A lot of horses can actually learn all those maneuvers better if you give them better communication, which is a bridle. And so I'm not necessarily advocating, you know, go from 0 to 60 in one jump. But hey, pay attention. There's a gate down there. You go through it and you can breed those mares all you want. So I'm not advocating going from a snaffle necessarily right straight to a spade bit, especially if you've never done it. But I am advocating, you know, you can add some leverage, you can add some shank to a bit, and a lot of times you can get a lot more communication done, and you can really advance your horse. So the long and the short of it is the last day of our clinic, the guy with the gray mare noticed that she had a little bit of swelling in her tendons, and so he finished the clinic on a different horse. Thankfully, he lived close by. Finished the clinic on a different horse. Had her vet checked. That tendon was kind of pulled or something. I haven't actually spoken to him. My wife spoke to him, and she's supposed to have the next several months off. And so during that downtime, he wants to start introducing her to the bridle. And wanted me to call him. I haven't called him yet, but wanted me to call him and kind of talk him through it. So I'm really excited about it, because I've never actually I've never introduced a horse to a bridle over the phone from the other side of the continent, and I've never done it while they were on downtime like that. But the introduction process is a great time. You know, having a horse on downtime and on rest is a great time to do it anyway. Watching these mares and this stud run around the arena here, and at this point they're all so excited about running around that none of them are doing any business yet. He's starting to. So I'll talk about what I'm going to have him do, and this I think is a really good way for anybody that's listening to introduce a horse into the bridle. Now, whether we're going to do it the traditional way, and by that by traditional I mean the West Coast tradition of two-rein process and all that, which I think is really the best way to go, but not always necessary. But whether we're going to do it that way with the two-rein and all that, or not, the very first introduction part is going to be the same as far as I'm concerned, and then I'll talk about different ways of putting a horse in a bridle after that. So the first part of that introduction is finding what kind of bridle we want, what kind of bridle we're going to use. People ask me that a whole bunch about mouth conformation and body conformation, and I'll talk about that, and I've got a lot of answers to that. I think it's I've discovered a really tough topic to talk about, just to get the concepts across. But one thing I try to tell people, and I think it's pretty true. It's something that Ernie Marsh, who's a very well-known bit maker, Loriner is the correct word, something that Ernie Marsh said, not to me, I read it in a quote that he said to somebody, but I agree with it. He said, pick a bit that you like the looks of, and chances are your horses will figure out how to ride in it. And that's true. I think they're such cool animals, and there's so much willingness and so much try to get along in every horse, if we're doing our part right, that they'll figure it out. I really believe that. On the other hand, bit conformation or mouth conformation and body conformation, and which bit we choose depending on how we ride, sure makes it easier for them. As far as I'm concerned, you know, a Las Cruces bit is the coolest looking that there is, but not a lot of horses can really get along with that very easily. They darn sure have to work at it. So there is a lot to choosing our bit, even though they will figure it out if we just choose one that we think looks cool. They will figure it out, but choosing the bit's important. And so the guy with the gray mare, he and I already discussed probably what she needs on that day. I got a chance to look at her mouth and things like that, but just for the crash course of it, there's more to it than what I'm going to talk about today, because a lot of it's visual. But in terms of the crash course, the main things we need to look at is the dimensions of the mouth. Almost every horse, between their jaw bones where the tongue lays, almost every horse is right about 2.5 inches in width. Once in a while, you see something that's real drafty or real Araby that's either wider or narrower than that, but the vast majority of horses are 2.5 inches. And the way we measure that is under their jaw. So the underside of their jaw is the same width as the inside of their jaw where their tongue lays. And like I said, this has got some visual stuff to it. If you'll look back on the YouTube archives, dig around in there, about 2 years ago, I did a video when I had a skull and showed how to measure it and everything like that. But you can look under your horse's jaw, under its chin, and it's narrow, and then it starts to widen out, and then it widens into the throat. Well, right before it widens into the throat, that widest part there is where you measure, and generally it's 2.5 inches. If it's wider or narrower than that, then we have to start looking at different mouthpieces. So what we don't want is a mouthpiece so narrow that it sits inside that groove and just puts all the weight on the tongue. We also don't want one so wide that it sits over top of that groove and puts all the weight and all the pressure on the bars. So we want something that's right about 2.5 inches. Then of course we need to measure the actual width of the mouth from cheek to cheek. That's pretty easy to do. You take a stick, put some marks on it, put it in their mouth, and come out with the width. In my opinion, having a bit that's a little too wide is a lot better deal than having a bit that's a little too narrow, for obvious reasons. It's kind of like I wear a 10.5 shoe, but I'll get along just fine in an 11, but I'm not going to get along very good in a 10. So we measure the width of their mouth, then we look at their tongue. And a lot of this comes from looking at lots and lots of horses' mouths. And so if you're new to this, an amateur to this, or just even if you're not amateur to this or new to this, you just haven't ever paid attention to it and are wanting to, what you got to do is just go look at a lot of horses' mouths. Stick your hand in there and look and find out what an average is, because we're looking at the width of their tongue, or the thickness of their tongue, not the width. Different horses have different thicknesses of tongues and length of tongues too, just like humans do. Some horses have really, really fat tongues. Some horses have really, really thin tongues. So that's what we need to check out. If it's a horse with a real thin tongue, we want a bit that's not as heavy, and I mean literal weight. Meaning, if you're like me and you like bits with lots of silver on them, you're going to want to pick something with not as much silver on it, not as much added weight. You also, if it's a real thin tongue, you want the cannon to be a larger diameter. And that's just so there's more surface area, so there's less pressure on the tongue when the bit engages. If it's a horse with a real thick tongue, then you might want something with a narrower cannon, smaller diameter of that bar, just so you get a little more bite. Less surface area, you're going to get some more bite on that tongue. Also, with a real thick tongue horse, you might want to look at tongue relief. And tongue relief is something that is pretty misunderstood, I've found. We hear the word relief and we think of like relieving pressure, relieving pain. And what tongue relief means is there's relief for the tongue, like in a topographical map. Boy, these horses are crazy today. So like in a topographical map, that's called relief. And so tongue relief is just a place in the cannon where that tongue can go in, that can fill in that area. And when that tongue fills in that area, when the bit's engaged, you're able to put more pressure on the bars. The bars of the horse's mouth are a very thin piece of bone that are on the very tops of the jaw, on the inside, top of the bottom jaw. I suppose they have bars on the top jaw too, I never paid any attention. But it's a very thin piece of bone on the top of the bottom jaw, and it's really sensitive. people talk about how sensitive the mouth is, and that's the part that's sensitive, is the bars. The tongue's not that sensitive. I mean, the tongue's sensitive, but it's pretty hard to hurt the tongue. The cheeks aren't very sensitive. It's the bars where all the sensitivity is. And so that's what we got to protect. And with the bridle, the horse uses its tongue to guard those bars from the pressure of the bit, the downward pressure that's applied when we engage the bit. And a bit with tongue relief offers a place for that tongue to go, and then the bit can engage those bars directly. So anything with tongue relief is, I've said again and again, that bits aren't severe or non-severe in and of themselves. They can't be one or the other. It's our hands, but for lack of a better term, any bit with tongue relief is a little more severe. There's more chance of us engaging those bars with more pressure. So if you've got and tongue relief's not a bad thing. Don't look at it like that. It just offers more communication. But if you've got a horse with a real thin tongue, you don't want that tongue relief. And if you've got a horse with a real fat tongue, you probably do want that tongue relief. Buckskin horse, if you would get out of somebody's way once in a while, you wouldn't get poked with a rake. Get out of the road, get out of the road, get out of the road. Continue getting out of the road. Get out of the road until you're clear on the other side of the stall. There. Tongue relief, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and so those are some of the things we need to look at in a horse's mouth before we choose our bit. We need to make sure they're on the average there in terms of the width of their jaw. We figure out the width of their actual mouth. We look at their tongue, find out if they got a fat tongue, a skinny tongue, an average tongue, and we go from there. Like I said, that's a crash course. There's a lot more to determining our bits and what we want to use. It's got a lot to do with their conformation. I've got some videos on that too, and I'm planning on doing more. But like I said, it's been a hard concept for me to try to put into words. But we've determined our bit. Okay, now what do we do? Well, I like to give that horse ample opportunity to just get used to the bit. And so I will take and let them wear the bit on their off time. I don't put it on them in the stall and just turn them loose and let them eat. That's going to cause you some wrecks in a lot of different ways. I don't like to tie them up, like tie them to a hitch rail or a post with that bit, because there is an opportunity for them to rub and get it tangled up and maybe get in some kind of a wreck. I'm actually less worried about that wreck. If they're rubbing around in there, they'll learn that bit pretty fast. What I'm most worried about is all my bits have silver on them, and I don't want them to knock that silver off. So what I do is I find either a rafter or the limb of a tree or anything like that, any kind of overhead deal where I can hang a rope and tie them so they're tied from above. And of course, not tight. When I say I hang them, they're not literally hung. I've said that a few times and got in trouble. Oh my gosh, he hangs these horses. And that's not literal. So anyway, that's what I mean when I say I hang them. I tie them up to where they're tied from above and they're just out in the open, and they can kind of go around at their leisure to some point, but they still can't really go anywhere. But that way they can move their feet around while they're learning about that bit. They can't rub on anything and get tangled up in that bit, and they can't knock the silver off my bit, which, like I said, is my actual main concern. But I like to give them, and the question is always, well, how long? Well, you can't do too much of it. That's one answer. I was taught to do it that way, and when I have the opportunity to do it, I don't always, but when I have the opportunity to do it, I like to start doing that to colts before I ever even ride them. And when I'm doing that, I'm not that particular about the bit and the bit conformation and the this and the that and the other thing, because they've got baby mouths and there isn't a bit that fits. But I like to do it from before I ever start riding them, and then I try to do it every day. And I was taught that every day that you miss is 1 degree of handle that your horse loses when he's finished. Now, how true is that? I don't know. But sometimes you just go with the way you were taught. I also like to start introducing him to the bit on the full moon. Now that sounds like kind of old hooey wives' tale kind of a deal, but if you think about it, one of the main things we're looking for in the introduction of that bit is salivation. We want saliva because that's the lubricant between the bit and their mouth. That's what keeps them from burning their mouth when we start engaging the bit, and that is with the snaffle bit too. And so I introduce the bit on a full moon, which some people have taken that to a little more extreme of what I mean, and literally do it at night. You don't have to literally do it at night. It's the phase of the moon. And so I just do it during the full phase of the moon. And when I say, it sounds kind of like a wives' tale, but if you think about it, it makes sense. The moon controls the way water works in the whole world. I mean, I know certain springs in deserty places that the spring only runs. The spring only runs during the full moon, and the rest of the time it doesn't run. It makes changes in our body during the full moon because we're mostly made of water. Horses are mostly made of water as well. And so we're looking for that salivation. And I really think that introducing that bit when they're most likely to salivate works really well. So that's the next step there. I like to hang them up, let them hold the bit. I try to start doing it during the full moon, or at the very least coming into the full moon and not going out of the full moon. And if you miss it because you don't have a calendar or something, that's not that big of a deal. Wait a month. I'm real excited to start my horse into a bit. Well, heck, I am too, but it's coming out of the full moon phase and it's starting to wax. Yes, I know, the moon's starting to wane, not wax. I apologize. Wax is the other way around. So those are some of the things that I'm going to tell this guy to do. And some of that we've already talked about. And then back to the question of, well, how long do I let him hold that bit every day? How many days in a row do I do it? Do I need to do it every day? Well, a lot of that you can let the horse tell you. Yeah, I think every day is important, but if you're a business executive and you can't do it every day, well, do it as many days as you can. If you think that 2 hours is too long for that horse to stand tied, well, I disagree, but if that's how you feel, then an hour a day, or 45 minutes a day, or whatever the case may be. And for how many days in a row, for how long, let the horse tell you. And that's, a lot of horsemen say things like that. Let the horse tell you. Well, shoot, what are you supposed to do with an answer like that? Let the horse tell me. That's why I'm listening to horse podcasts, is because I don't know when the horse tells me. Well, what I mean by that is what we're trying to do with the introduction of that bit is get some submission in their mouth. Now that's another term that people get their feelings hurt by, submission, because I don't know why you guys get upset when I talk about submission. I don't know if you guys are into whips and chains and weird stuff like that, but that's not what I mean. Submission is just the willingness. You can look it up in the dictionary because I'm going to say it wrong, but it's nothing more than the willingness to go along with someone else's idea. You know, that's all submission is. When you submit yourself, you're just saying, yeah, I'll do what you say. And that's not a dishonorable thing. That's not a bad thing. That's the whole. You can put as many flowers on it as you want, but that's all horse training is anyway, is getting them to submit to our will. And so submission in their mouth, I just want them to submit to that bit, meaning they pick it up, they put it where it's comfortable, and they hold it. And they're not fidgeting around with it, they're not making a fuss about it, they're not this and that. And so once they're real consistent about that, we're good. And you might put a bit in your horse's mouth, and in 4 minutes they've picked it up, put it where they want it, and are holding it. And you say, "Raha, he's submitted in his mouth." Well, wait a while, see what happens, because a half hour later he might go to moving it around because he doesn't have it exactly where he wants. You might do that 2 days in a row and he's holding it good. Well, just keep waiting. Give him a chance to figure out where it needs to be. Give him a chance to move his feet with it. And find out where he really wants to put it. And then that's submission. Paint, you're just as big a pain in the butt as the rest of them. If you haven't figured out by this point, I'm cleaning stalls while I'm talking. So that's what we're looking for in the submission of their mouth. You'll see, I see all the time on some of these horse people pages on Facebook that they go, "Oh look, my horse loves this bit. This is the first time he's ever had it in his mouth," and they go to take the bit out, and the horse holds onto the bit and just holds it there. He must love this bit. That does not mean your horse loves the bit. What that means is that your horse has submitted to that bit, has a submissive mouth, and is holding that bit, holding it where it needs to be. Ideally we'd be able to ride a horse without a head stall. I don't suggest trying that, but that's the ideal we're going for. And so when you go to take that bit out of that horse's mouth and it holds on to it, that doesn't mean your horse loves that bit, but that means something more important. That means that you've got submission in the mouth, and that's far more important than a horse that just loves a bit. And in terms of loving a bit, horse loves any bit he can run through. If they can run through a bit, they love it. I've had lots of snaffle bit colts. The first ride in the snaffle bit, up to the 10th or 12th ride in the snaffle bit, where they finally figure out how to spit it out when it's time. Hold on to that snaffle bit. It just means they've learned to submit to it. And so that's a pretty good sign there. It doesn't have to be that. Well, Brett, I've been letting this horse hold a bit for 2.5 months, and he still spits it out when he's supposed to, when I go to take it off. That doesn't necessarily mean he's not submissive to the bit, especially if it's a horse that's been ridden a lot and is pretty darn broke and understands the whole process, like the mare in question that we started this whole deal with. She's 10 years old and dang sure broke. When we go to take the bit off of her, she knows how to get a bit taken off. So she's just gonna, no matter how much she likes the bit, she's just gonna go ahead and spit it out just like she's supposed to. So that doesn't need to be the one and only thing we're looking for. but that is something to look for. And other things we can be looking for during that introduction process are things like the horse. You got to listen and watch. Is the horse salivating? Is the horse sucking on the bit? You'll hear him actually suck on it. Is the horse moving the bit around a bunch, or just moving it around when you first put it on, moving it around a little bit, putting it where they want? Once they start doing that consistently, to where you put the bit on and they do the same thing every time, slosh it around, put it exactly where they want, and then clamp down on it and start drilling. Then we know they've figured out how to carry that bit, or at least how to hold it. We'll get into the carrying part here in a second, but they've figured out how to hold it. I mentioned the drooling. Not every one of them is gonna really drool. A lot of them will if you've got a good bit, but not every one of them's gonna. But drooling's something to look for, and even if they're not drooling, be looking when you take that bit off after however long they've held it, be looking to see if there's a lot of saliva in the mouth, more so than there normally is. The reason that's such a good indicator is because if they're taking that bit, putting it where they want it, and holding on to it, they're holding it with their tongue, holding it in place where they want it with their tongue, and that's going to cause saliva. That's going to cause a horse to salivate. And so the amount of saliva is a good indicator as to whether this horse is holding on to the bit or not. If we're continuing not to get saliva, there's a million things that could be going on there, and I'll just kind of hit some of the high points of it, because it can get pretty in depth. But one of the things that could be going on is you've got a piece of junk bridle. And when I say that, it could be the jankiest looking thing in the whole wide world. That's the word I just learned yesterday on the phone, janky. But it could be the jankiest looking bit in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. What I'm talking about, good or bad, is the actual iron content in the mouthpiece. We want something that'll rust. We want something with high iron content. I don't like, a lot of these bits that are they've blued the mouthpiece or chromed the mouthpiece on some of them. That horse can't get to it. Looks pretty, but that horse can't get to the iron there. Bluing and chrome, the whole point of that is to protect the iron from moisture, to protect it from rust. Well, that's what we want. We want rust. I don't want to stick anything in their mouth that won't rust. My only exception is Monel, which is a form of stainless. It's a different configuration of elements than actual stainless is, and Monel does have a flavor and will cause them to salivate. Stainless steel, aluminum. Somebody asked me about titanium the other day. Who in the world's making a titanium bit? Why are you making bits out of titanium? All those kinds of things don't have any flavor and won't cause a horse to salivate. And so when I'm talking about flavor is one thing, and you can put a bit in your mouth and just put your tongue to it. You can tell there's a flavor there or not. But flavor is one thing, but what I'm actually looking for when I talk about a bit that'll rust is the actual chemical reaction that's occurring. So when iron and moisture and oxygen come together, it causes a chemical reaction that causes the iron to rust, oxidation, but it also causes a horse to salivate. And so that's what we're looking for. People have asked me about copper in a bit. Is it necessary, not necessary? I don't care if you have copper in your bit or not. And quite frankly, I'm not even sure if the horse cares one way or the other, but what copper does is it increases that chemical reaction between the iron, the moisture, and the oxygen. So there's a bigger chemical reaction. It's a different chemical reaction too, but it causes more salivation. So copper in the bit, yeah, I think it's a good thing. I've got some old bits that are made out of hand forged iron, and hand forged like coal forged. And so they've got a ton of iron content in them anyway, and they don't have any copper. Horses drool like crazy with those. Sometimes you get a newer bit, doesn't have, you know, our modern steel doesn't have as much iron content in it. So Loriners will throw in some copper. I talked about bits that are blued or chromed. I've got several that I liked the bit, but it was either blued or chromed. You can take a torch. You can even use the little handheld butane torches that you get at Home Dynasty or whatever that place is called, and just run it on there and burn that chrome off, burn that bluing off. And you want to be a little careful you don't get it so hot that you burn yourself or melt the silver, but you can fix a bit that way. So there's where we're at there. We've been hanging the horse. We picked a bit. We've been hanging the horse. They've figured out how to hold it. So what's our next step? So our next step is going to be letting the horse actually engage the bit. And I want to point out here that I said earlier that whether I'm going two-rein way or whether with a really broke mare like we were talking about, that we're going to skip that. This is all, I'm still doing all the same stuff. So when I say I want to let that horse engage the bit, I mean I want it to be able to move its feet around in a natural way, in a sense, in whatever way they please. And I also want them to move in a work environment. So as complicated as that sounds, what that actually means is I put the bit on them, I turn them loose in the round pen and let them just fiddle around. Let them fiddle around a little bit, sniff things, raise and lower their head, move around at their own leisure. This is the point where they do now have an opportunity to go rub that bit on the fence, so I'm a little careful. I kind of stay there and watch, but I don't mind if they rub it a little bit, because they get a chance then to go, oh, that thing changes in my mouth when I rub. So I'll let them rub on it a little bit, a very, very little bit. And like I said, it's more out of protection for my bit than anything else. So I give them a few minutes, and really that's all they need, is just a few minutes to just kind of go around, do their own thing, and figure out that when they move around, raise and lower their head, they still have to be responsible for that bit. They still have to hold it, still have to take care of it. And so once they've moved around a little on their own, then I go in and just engage them, just basically just round pen them around a little bit, just chase them around. I'm really not one for working a horse loose in a round pen very much. Oh, once in a while an older horse, I'll kick them in there and chase them around if they've been standing in the stall for a couple of days. But for the most part, when I'm working one, I want them in hand. But in this case, I don't do it in hand. I do it with that horse loose, so that they've got an opportunity to change their gait, change the size and scope of the circle they're going in. They've got an opportunity to kind of do all the things I normally don't want them to do with that bit in their mouth, and feel what it does. The really, really important part about this whole process, the who, what, when, where, and how otherwise, isn't all that important. The important part is that we take the curb strap off when we do this. Take the curb strap off so that that bit can rotate as far as is mechanically possible and move around as much as is mechanically possible, so that horse learns to pick up that bit and hold it, pack it around. Back to, well, how long do I do this? For how many days do I do it? And it's back to the elusive answer of let the horse tell you. And by that is when they're moving around comfortably and they're consistently not getting that bit kinked up and consistently going around and not getting themselves in trouble, not throwing their head in the air because they let go of the bit, that's how long. It's really important to take that curb strap off of them while you're letting them engage the bit in the round pen, because they need to learn that they have to be responsible for that bit at all times. And if they lose responsibility, in the sense that they lose the contact that they have to engage with the bit, it'll go to rattling around and bang them in the mouth, and that hurts. So we want to let them go through all the gates in the round pen at liberty. I don't like that term very much, but that's what everybody understands. Let them go through all the gates, let them go both directions, roll them back hard, get a stop, like do all the stuff they know how to do in a round pen. And if they don't have any things that they know how to do in a round pen, you're probably not ready to go to the bridle anyway. So just roll them around in there. And like I was saying before I got interrupted there, to what extent? Well, when they're going around there, going through all the motions, and they're keeping a hold of that bit, you can watch that bit. If it's rotating back and forth as they're moving, they're not holding on to it. They need to hold it more. They need to work more with it. If they're changing gaits or changing directions and they end up throwing their head up in the air and rolling their eye back, it's because that bit rotated in their mouth and bumped them. If they're doing any of those kinds of things, raising and lowering their head an abnormal amount, and by an abnormal amount, that means you need to have enough perception that you know what the normal amount is. If they're just going around in there loose with a low amount of pressure from you on the ground, they're going to raise and lower their head and look at stuff and this and that. Unless you're like the world champion join-up instructor or something like that, maybe they won't. But to some extent, they're going to move their head around. But if they're doing it more than normal, more than average with that bit, then you need to keep doing it. We don't ever want to work these horses into exhaustion. So my deal with, and I don't want to ever work a horse into acceptance either. I like to work a horse into tolerance. And so if they're going around, 15, 20 minutes, and then they kind of settle, I'll put them up and do it again the next day. Going around 10, 15 minutes, and then they kind of settle and hold on that bit, I put them up and do it the next day. But it's not until several days in a row that they've gone around there and not had any adjustment period, gone into that round pen prepared for what they're going to do and holding on to that bit. Once they've done that several days in a row, then they figured out how to hold that bit, how to carry it, and then we can move on to the next step, riding them with the bit. So here's where we can diverge from how we're doing this process, whether we're going to go with the two-rein process or whether we're going to, for lack of a better term, Texas them into the bridle. In my opinion, and this is what I'm going to tell the fella, there's no reason to not do a two-rein process. He's got an English background, and so he's familiar with the double bridle, a Bridle setup. It's the exact same thing, really. But there's no reason to not do the two-rein process, in my opinion. You don't have to be a dedicated vaquero and spend $500-600 on a bozalita and hair reins and this and that and the other. you can do it the poor man's way. I will argue that if you're going to do anything with a hackamore in earnest, getting good equipment, well, anything in earnest, but getting better equipment, getting the best equipment that can be had is always the right way to do things. However, in this case, he's wanting to put her in the bridle, but he's not necessarily going for a traditional spade bit horse or anything like that. So just a double over piece of nylon lariat works just fine. It's not as good. Don't let anybody tell you it's the same thing. It's not, but it'll work for this situation. And this mare is so broke that she's not going to need very much of it. So going through the whole process of buying all that equipment and everything, and spending the money for her isn't necessarily a way you need to go, because she's not gonna need more than about 20 rides in a two-rein to have the whole deal figured out. She's just that broke. So if we're going the two-rein process, there's been times when I was younger and learning how to do this, I went the whole way of riding them with the two-rein with the under bridle, or the Bosalita on there, and then letting them just carry the bridle with no chains, no reins, no nothing, and let them just carry the bridle for however long and experimented around. I think probably if you are a first timer with somewhat uneducated hands, that's probably a good way to go. The way I do it now, I put the reins on from the first day, and sometimes don't use them for a day, sometimes don't use them for a week. Some horses I go ahead and pick those reins up and kind of engage things, in the first 15 minutes. And so that's got a lot to do with experience. But I would say ride them a few days with no reins, just the underbridle or the Bosalita, and let them carry the bridle. A couple of days, let them just like in the round pen where they were figuring out how to pack it. They need to figure out how to pack it while they're packing you. At this point, I do put the curb strap back on, so they don't have to take 100% of the responsibility. Because I'll ride them out, ride them in the field, do whatever it is I do on them, whether it's ranching or reining type work, or cutting a cow, or whatever, in this case, jumping, whatever it is you do on that horse, I go ahead and go do for a couple of days. And the same process that we were watching in the round pen, once they're real consistent about picking that bridle up and packing it and being responsible for it, well, then we can move on to the next step. And that involves putting the reins on the bridle, and then little by little using the hackamore less and less and less till we're about 50%, and then putting the hackamore reins behind the bridle reins and using the bridle more and more and more until you're just using the bridle. That's a crash course version of the two-rein process, and it's not more complicated than that. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's not any more complicated than that. That's where people run into a wall in the two-rein process, is they try to make it more complicated than it is. All you're doing with that hackamore is just giving them something that they know about as they're learning about something new. And then really once you've been, at least with me, once I've been riding them like that for a week or a month, depending on what I'm doing, once I've been riding them in that setup for a little while, I kind of go using my bridle and using my bridle reins, and that hackamore is there if I get into something that's too much to do with the bridle. So I'll give an example here, and then you can take this example and put it into your world. If I was putting one in the bridle on the ranch, and I had to just go trot around and check a bunch of waters on the ranch, I'm going to trot 18 miles that day and just kind of hit a trot and go across the country. I'll put that two-rein setup on, and I'll just use the bridle, and that two-rein's just there for a just in case. But I'll use that bridle and I'll steer my horse around, go around a tree, go around a bush, check my waters, do this and that. But in the event that over the course of my trip, I see a sick calf that needs doctored, or there's a bull out that needs put back in, something where I'm going to have to do some riding and really use my horse, well, then I'm going to go to that hack more, and then that bridle's just going to hang there and be part of it. So early on in the process, it's going to be like that, clear through until when I hit those situations, those unexpected things where I've got to do some high riding, I don't even think about using the hack more. I just do it all in the bridle. That's when I know it's time to go ahead and finish the horse. So take that example, and you can put that into your day-to-day stuff, that you can warm up and do some low-level maneuvers in the bridle, but when it comes to lead changes, you need to use the hack more. Or you can do all the maneuvers with the bridle, but you can't do them at speed, so then you pick up the hack more. Those are the kinds of things that two-rein is for after the initial introduction. Let's say we're not going to go the two-rein route. What do? Our horse is broke. We've introduced the bridle. Now what? We just ride him. We ride him and ride him and ride him and ride him and try to ride him in lots of straight lines at a trot outside. It's really, really hard to put a horse in the bridle in the arena anyway, but it's really, really hard to do it if you're just doing flat work, just doing dry work. If you don't have a cow to work, if you don't have something to do, if you're just loping circles and doing dry maneuvers, it is really, really hard to put a horse in the bridle without a two-rein. We have this tendency to cheat and to squaw rein them. It's okay to do a little at first, just so they kind of figure out what we're after. But this tendency to squaw rein a horse, it gets addictive in our hand. Our hand gets addicted to doing it, and then we don't even realize we're doing it, and we're cheating the horse. And if we just keep doing that, well, yeah, we should have just stayed in the snaffle anyway, because we're not utilizing the bridle for what it is, which is a better means of communication. So if I'm not going with the two-rein, if I've got the country, I'm just going to go and trot and just go outside a lot and let that horse engage the country, the change in ground, the ups, the downs, hills, around a tree, this and that, and just try to use my reins a lot and be real forgiving when it doesn't work. I also do a lot of trotting small circles, just trotting that horse around my leg. By this point in the education of the horse, they already know that exercise where they just trot a small circle around my leg. I'm just going to do a lot of that and use my leg for the cue, for the main cue, and then engage that indirect rein and just let them melt the two together to where they start to understand that rein. So that's real simplified, but it's not oversimplified. Putting a horse in the bridle is not that complicated. They don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be everything you're ever going to do. They have to do perfect in a snaffle. That's a myth, and that'll make it to where you never advance yourself and never advance your horse. The horse just has to be broke enough that they know how to do work. They know what their work is. They know how to find the answer. If they're not getting an attaboy out of you, they keep searching until they do. That's all the broker they need to be to advance them. And then the advancing process is really simple. Just give them an opportunity to feel out and to understand what you're advancing them to, and then be forgiving. Start engaging the maneuvers that you do and engaging the horse with the advanced equipment. In this case, it's a bridle. Start engaging them and be forgiving if it doesn't work. The whole point of the two-rein is that's the forgiveness part, that you use that so when it doesn't work, you can use that. That's the forgiveness part. If you're not using that, then you just have to be even more sympathetic and set things up slower and simpler for a horse. I'm going to end it there. I could talk about hows and whats and wherefores of putting a horse in a bridle, but I wanted to focus on just how simple it is, how unscary it is. There's a lot of people out there preaching the word that if you mess up, you got to make sure everything's ready, everything's perfect. And then you got to go ultra super slow and be super careful, because if you mess up, you'll mess it up forever. That's simply not true. If horses learn that way, I'd be out of a job, because everybody could train a horse, because they don't learn from one instance. If the horse makes a mistake and you fly off the handle and go to jerking the heck out of him and lose your temper, even that isn't going to ruin him for life. If you're the kind of person that flies off the handle and goes to jerking on your horse because they kind of messed up, that's going to ruin the horse for life. That's you, but that's not the bridling process. So it's not scary. It should be simple. They're not linear thinkers, so they need it to be simple. And we're linear thinkers, and we tend to make things overcomplicated. So keep it simple. It doesn't need to be scary. If you start riding that bridle and it's really not working, well, that just tells you your horse wasn't as broke as you thought. You can go back to something else. You can always go back down. You can always go back to a hackmore. You can always go back to a snaffle bit. And even horses I've had in the bridle for years, I'll put a hackmore on them and school on them a little bit, sharpen them up. So you can always go back, and it's nothing to be afraid of. If it doesn't work, it just didn't work. That's not a big deal. And don't overcomplicate it. It's just a bridle. Just use it.